Chapter 2, The Adolescence of Air Power Developments in the United States. So we had just finished Chapter 1 and talking about the dirigibles and development of the airplane and the Wright brothers, and finished up with the Wright brothers, and you watched the videos, last video on the Wright brothers and such things. And you'll find that that is a very significant point in history, is the development of the heavier than air powered flight. So what we're going to see here is how the um, powered flight and how aircraft and how air power developed in the United States. We're going to talk about in Europe, and we're going to talk then about World War One in this chapter. So to start out, we're going to talk in this particular PowerPoint. It's just we're going to talk about the United States and how things continue to develop and continue to work. So. First of all, my if you notice, um, my slide is titled "Unnoticed" because that is how air power really started out in the United States. It was unnoticed. Only one newspaper even published an account of the Wright brothers' first flight in 1903. So there was only one newspaper, and what they found, or what they thought, the Wright brothers, is that that article itself was very poorly written. It wasn't telling the story the way it should have been told. It was very bad. It was very misleading. It didn't tell the right facts. It didn't tell everything that it should have been. And so the Bright brothers were kind of really upset with this fact, that they went and they made a public statement to the Associated Press. That's what the AP is. And the Associated Press is a international news service. It is a service that companies like the local New Prague Times or the Star and Tribune, they will get articles from the Associated Press and to publish in their paper, and you'll get and things like that. So they went to the Associated Press on January 5th, 1904, to kind of clarify their first flight and correct basically what was written about their first flight and give the actual facts, give the statements as given. And what happened with that is either nobody picked up the story and put it in the newspaper, or the papers that did, it was kind of hidden deep within inside the paper. So it was still not very popular. Okay, the first flight, and as we look at it today, over 100 years later, it's like this is a significant thing in the history of aviation, but at that point in time, nobody thought anything of it. It wasn't that big of a deal. Well, not being deterred, the Wright brothers continued their flights anyway. Okay, so they came home from Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, and went back home to Ohio. And from 1904 to 1905, they made their flights in a pasture just outside of Dayton, Ohio. So they were basically flying around with in a fenced-in area, in an area that they had just borrowed or they owned or something like that, and they're flying the airplane out there. Tweaking it, getting it better, fixing it, doing things, experimenting with their wing warping, experimenting with their maneuvering, basically in themselves learning how to fly better. Okay. On October 1905, they actually had a flight of 38 minutes. So that's a huge, huge, huge increase from their last flight at Kitty Hawk, which was a grand total of 2 minutes. Okay. This flight covered about 24 miles worth of distance. And the only reason why this flight actually ended is because they ran out of fuel. So they could have flown longer, could have flown farther, but they had the fuel issue. So as you can see, over the last year, okay, or 2 years, they have been improving flying the plane, learning how to fly, learning how to control, getting more time in flight, getting more distance coverage, probably tweaking the airplane a little bit to make it a little bit better, probably tweaking motors or getting new motors, trying to figure out which best motor. And so they had, issues and things like that, but they were improving greatly. The next slide here starts out with government, as we always have to have the government kind of involved in certain things. And so in 1905, this is the odd part of the government involved. Okay, the government did not approach the Wright brothers. The Wright brothers approached the government and offered to build an aircraft to meet the government's needs. So the Wright brothers go to the United States military, the government, in some form. And they said, we're going to want to build you an airplane. Okay, we'll build an airplane. What do you need? So on and so forth. And the government was, yeah, not really. We're not interested. They weren't really enthusiastic about the airplane. It's not a big deal to them. Again, kind of the carryover from the Wright brothers' first flight in 1903, where nobody was really interested. The United States government wasn't even that interested. Okay, part of their reasoning, more than likely, was the fact that you remember back in chapter 1, they had offered $50,000 to Langley to develop an airplane, and that airplane was a very utter failure. And so they didn't want to be embarrassed again about with another airplane that didn't fly, didn't work right. So that was probably one of their reasons of not responding very well to the Wright brothers, was the fact that they didn't have a good experience with Langley. Okay. Um, but the Wright brothers were persistent, but the government refused them 3 different times. Says, no, we don't want to do it. We don't want to do it. Okay. Well, again, being very persistent, the Wright brothers continued on, and they basically said, okay, at least give us some idea what you would be looking for if we were to develop an airplane for you. And so the government finally came out and said, okay, here's the thing. These are the criteria, and there's 7 requirements that you need to meet in order for us to even think about getting an airplane from you guys. Okay, so you need to do this, and I'm sure the government kind of went in there and said, you know what, we're going to make these kind of far fetched. We're going to make them so because we know what they can do. Now we're going to make them a little bit more advanced, so that they probably aren't going to be able to do it. So we don't have to worry about these guys bothering us anymore, and things like that. So they went on and listed out these 7 requirements. A couple of the requirements are pretty obvious, like the first one, they need to have a pilot, okay? Because otherwise it's not a airplane if it doesn't have a pilot in it. But then they added, you know what? If you're going to have a pilot, you're going to have a passenger. So you have to have at least 2 people on this airplane, okay? And I suppose they had thoughts that if they were going to have one person, the other person's going to be doing some other type of stuff on the airplane or something like that. So it had to carry a passenger. It had to have enough fuel for a 125-mile trip. Well, if you take a look, their last one, they ran out of gas after 24 miles. So looks like the Wright brothers had a little bit of work to do here. Okay? The other thing, had to fly at least 36 miles per hour. Now, I'm not 100% sure how many miles per hour they were traveling up to this time, but it probably wasn't quite 36 yet. But so they had to get up to 36 miles per hour. The one thing the Wright brothers were probably fairly confident on is having it under control, because that was the main thing that they focused on, was making sure they could control the airplane in flight. So they had to be under perfect control. Okay. And an interesting point is that the government wanted them to make sure they could take off and land in a likely war zone without damage. Not probably being shot at damage, but without crashing and tearing up the airplane, is what they were probably looking for. So obviously they were looking for, well, if we're going to do this, it'll probably be flying in a war zone. So we want to make sure it can take off and land in that type of thing, that type of situation. The 7th and final requirement was it needed to be disassembled for transport by wagon to be reassembled within an hour. So they could be able to take it apart, put it back, and transport it and put it back together within an hour. So if they landed somewhere and they didn't have ability to take off from that place, they could disassemble it, move it somewhere else, and take off from some other place. So, They actually had to pack up the airplane and travel with it somewhere else without flying. That was one of their requirements. So it had to be assembled and reassembled. Okay, so if the Wright brothers met these requirements, the government would potentially buy an airplane from them. Okay, buy the airplane from them. They just added one more thing. It wasn't really a requirement for the airplane, but it was an additional thing that they wanted to have, which was, if we buy this airplane, you have to train pilots for us. Okay, you have to train at least 2 pilots for the Army to fly it, because we're not going to have Orville and Wilbur flying for the military. We want our own pilots flying it. So the Wright brothers went on and says, okay, we're going to do this. We'll go on and go ahead. So what happens is Orville started building the new plane. Okay, and he went on and started working on this new design to meet all these requirements. Wilbur went to France. Now Wilbur didn't go to France for a vacation, or just say, see you later, Orville. It's your job now. I'm done. Okay, he went to France to promote the airplane to European governments and European businessmen. Okay, he wanted to sell the airplane, so he went on the sales trip basically to France and demonstrated the Wright Flyer to European nations and businessmen to see if anybody over there wanted to purchase their airplane. What he did is he ended up signing a $100,000 contract to form a French aircraft building company. So what he did is he didn't form a Wright aircraft company in France. They had formed another company, and what he basically did is he sold the patent of the airplane to this company. If you remember in the video on the Wright brothers, they talked about the patent. Okay, the patent is, you go to the government and say, I want to. This is my invention. This is how it works. This is all the details on it, and I want to protect my idea or protect my rights to this invention. So I'm going to take a patent out on it, so nobody else can do exactly the way I'm doing. And there has to be like maybe some very specific things that they're doing that they're protecting. Okay, so their Orville and Wilbur's thing was the wing warping is really what they were protecting. The control of the aircraft is what they were protecting. How they could control it, because what they wanted to do is, now if somebody else developed an airplane to fly, they would not be able to use wing warping, because Orville and Wilbur owned the patent to that. And then Orville and Wilbur could go and sue whoever created an airplane with their technology. Um, Patents are still today is the same thing. If you ever watch Shark Tank, they always talk about, do you have a patent on that? Because if you don't have a patent on that, it means anybody can copy it and do it, and so on and so forth. And my wife works in an industry. She works in mechanical design, and she has 20 some patents to her name that she has. This is her development and her team's development that they did. They can't, nobody else can do this that other than her team for her company and stuff like that. So what they ended up doing is they sold the patent. So you can sell your patent to other companies. Great example of that is, if you take a look at like the computer that you have is a Chromebook that you probably look watching this presentation on. But if you were in my room, you would probably be sitting at a computer, and there are Lenovo's in here. But you go to Best Buy and you can find Lenovo computers, and Dell computers, and HP computers and stuff like that. Well, those aren't all those are all computer companies, but they're all working under one patent by IBM. Okay, IBM created the first PC, and they created the patent, and they sold the patent to Lenovo and HP and Dell and whatever. They created the patent and sold it to them, allowing these companies to use their technology. They can improve on it and change things with it, but they can use the base technology. And that's why you have so many different PC computer companies. Whereas if you go look at Macintosh, Macintosh or Apple, they only have Apple makes their products because Apple decided we are not going to sell our patent to any other company. We want to be the only ones that have this ability to make this type of computer, and we are going to be the ones that can sue anybody that makes a computer that runs the same way an Apple computer does. They did it back a number of years ago where they did sell a patent to a company. The company started making computers, and they had a lot of issues with these Apple type of computers. So uh, Apple took the patent back, told them they can no longer make it, and because the wasn't up to the quality standards that Apple wanted in a product that would have their technology in it. So that's kind of a long story about patents, but that's basically what Wilbur went and did is sold the patent to this French company so they could make a Wright style flyer. It wouldn't have to be exactly like the Wright flyer, but the Wright style, and more than likely the main patent was the wing warping technology that they had. So they went and he signed this contract, and they did that, and they were going to start developing airplanes in France as well. Okay, so during this time and after this time, they were working and doing some test flights of this new airplane for the United States government in Fort Myers, Virginia. Okay, and in Fort Myers, Virginia, they had big space so that they could go and fly this airplane. And so they're doing all kinds of tests, and Orville completed 12 successful tests. He was getting the results that the government wanted. He was getting to the speed. He was getting to the distance. He was getting these results, and he was very successful. Um, of course, you always have to hit that 13th test when you do multiple tests like that. And just like everybody says, lucky 13, well, wasn't so lucky for Orville. A propeller broke and the airplane crashed on the 13th test. Again, it was a simple break of a propeller. Propeller snaps, you lose propulsion, you crash. Okay, it wasn't a design flaw; it was just a bad propeller. Okay, unfortunately, Orville was seriously injured in this accident. Okay, uh, but not only was Orville seriously injured, the passenger he had on board, Lieutenant Thomas Selfridge, died in this accident. So, again, remember that was one of the requirements by the United States government to be able to carry a passenger. Well, he had Lieutenant Thomas Selfridge in there, and he died in the crash. This was now the first person to actually lose their life in powered flight. Okay, the first person to lose their life in powered flight was Lieutenant Thomas Selfridge of the United States Army. Okay. However, they continued on. They continued doing more tests with airplanes, had more successes and stuff like that. And eventually, in August 2nd, 1909, the Army bought its first airplane from the Wright brothers. Okay, they paid a grand total of $25,000 for the airplane. Now, in 1909, $25,000 is a goodly sum of money for an airplane. It's not the millions of dollars like you get for an airplane nowadays, but it probably was a very, very good um, amount of money at that point in time. One of the things that the Army did do is they even gave a $5,000 bonus for exceeding the speed requirements. So, in other words, the Wright brothers built an airplane that actually went faster than 36 miles per hour, so much so that the government thought about or said, hey, we're going to give you a bonus for being faster than what we wanted you to be. Okay. Um, and then this became then the Army's first heavier than air flying machine. So in 1909, the United States Army now has an airplane. Okay. They now have an airplane. They now are starting into air power, into military air power. Okay. We'll talk about some other people other than the Wright brothers now because we've been talking about the Wright brothers here for a while. So there's some other people that actually had some contributions to the aerospace industry and aviation industry. The first person being Glenn Curtiss. Okay, Glenn Curtiss. When he was a teenager, he liked to build engines for motorcycles. So he was a tinkerer. He was a very smart individual with mechanics and stuff like that. And he basically, his motorcycle engines were known to be very light and very powerful. Matter of fact, he was so good at building uh, engines that his engines first were used on United States dirigibles, okay, as their power source, okay, as their control surfaces. So Curtiss engines became uh, used in aerospace before even the heavier than air powered flight was. Okay, and in 1907, uh, Glenn Curtiss became known as the fastest man on Earth. Okay, he liked building light and powerful motorcycle engines. Well, he liked racing motorcycles also, and he set a motorcycle speed record in 1907 of 136.3 miles per hour. That's pretty quick in 1907. So Glenn Curtiss became known as the fastest man on Earth because of his motorcycle speed records. Now, that's not his contribution, obviously, to aviation. He had other contributions to aviation other than just his dirigible engines. Okay, uh, he teamed up with another gentleman that you've heard of, and he teamed up with Alexander Graham Bell, and the inventor of the telephone. Okay, and he teamed up with them or with him, and they founded in 1907 the Aerial Experiment Association. So what they went into doing is they were making airplanes, experimenting with airplanes, and coming up with new ideas and how things could work and things like that. Remember now, the Wright brothers had a patent on wing warping. So they were experimenting with different ways to control airplanes and fly airplanes. So they came up with a couple other things, and they designed and built several aircraft. And they were the first ones to have an American aircraft equipped with ailerons. That'd be on this modern airplane here. That'd be the green pieces right here, the ailerons. And obviously, this isn't the airplane, but I wanted to show kind of where an aileron would be on a wing type of thing. And what an aileron does is an aileron aids in the steering of an airplane, exactly what wing warping did. So when you watch the video on wing warping, it takes the whole wing and twists it, whereas this, all it does is it takes a portion of the wing and moves this flap, kind of like a flap, and if this one goes up, this one goes down, and vice versa. If this one goes up, that one goes down, thus allowing it to be able to turn because you're changing the shape of the wing just by lifting a portion of the wing up or down on the trailing edge of that wing. So they became known as they came out with ailerons on an airplane, a different way to control an airplane other than wing warping. They also made the first seaplane in the United States, an airplane that could land on the water and take off from the water. Okay, so it would have floats and stuff like that. You can see the pilot sitting up here and things like that. And I don't know what type of float system. The water's kind of in the way here, but yeah, they made the first seaplanes land on the water and take off from the water. So that's kind of Glenn Curtiss, and Glenn Curtiss also went and started doing some other stuff in aviation and doing some building of some other airplanes and things like that also. Other things that Glenn Curtiss did is he also won the Scientific American Trophy in 1908. Okay, so and why he won that? He won that with his plane, the Junebug, and that's a depiction of what the Junebug looks like here. Okay, it's a bi-winged airplane. It's a pusher plane because the prop is in the back. Very similar style what the Wright airplane does, except it probably had more of an aileron to it than it did a wing warping because wing warping was the Wright brothers patent. Okay, and they did that with the Junebug, and it was the first. He won this because it was the first public flight over 1 kilometer in the U.S. Okay, and you sit there and say, well, wait a minute, the Wright brothers flew like 24 miles and 130, so many miles and this, that, and the other thing. This was the first one done in public. All the Wright brothers flights were demonstrations for military, demonstrations for newspapers, demonstrations for this and that. They were not brought out and just open to the public for people to watch. So this was the first public demonstration of a flight of over a kilometer. Okay. In 1909, at the Reims Air Meet, Glenn Curtiss won the Gordon Bennett Trophy. And if you take a look at the Gordon Bennett Trophy here, it actually is a depiction of the Wright Flyer on it. Okay. And the Gordon Bennett Trophy was won by the Ford because of the fastest 2 laps around a triangular 6.21 mile course. And he used the Golden Flyer, which, again, very big, very similar looking concept to the Wright Flyer. You had the elevator in the front, a pusher prop in the back. Here you can see a little bit better, more of the probably the aileron effect up there. But he was the fastest lap around the triangular course, and this was called, again, the plane was called the Golden Flyer. And he averaged about 47 miles per hour on these 2 laps. Okay, so Glenn Curtiss, now became really the fastest man on Earth and the fastest man in the air at this point in time. Right? And then he did some other things, obviously. And in 1910, Curtiss opened a flying school, and the Wright brothers also opened flying schools. 2 separate flying schools, but they both opened in 1910. So now these guys, Glenn Curtiss and the Wright brothers, are teaching other people to fly. Okay, teaching other people to fly. So now this is becoming a little bit more of a public thing. It's not just based on military or specific people. It's more of a public thing. As we go on here, there's a couple other feats and people that we want to talk about. 1910, Eugene Ely. Okay, Eugene Ely was the first person to fly an airplane off the deck of a ship. So they made a platform up here, put an airplane up there, and he flew it off and was able to maintain flight off the deck of a ship. Basically, if you think about it, the first flight off the deck of a ship, and that was the first time that basically a predecessor to the aircraft carriers we have today. Okay. Well, obviously, if you're going to fly off the ship, oh, by the way, he used the Curtiss biplane, and later on, he actually went and landed back on the deck of a ship, and you can see that, the deck is pretty crudely made because obviously this wasn't a mass-produced thing, and it's just a wooden deck here. I'm assuming this rail, or these rails here, was a way to launch and catapult the plane off, just like the Wright brothers airplane was catapulted off the ground and things like that. So if you're going to fly off the ship, you might as well be able to land on the ship too. So he was able to do both of those, okay, in a Curtiss biplane. So again, he used a Curtiss airplane with the ailerons and such things like that. Okay. Also in 1910, President Teddy Roosevelt was the first president in St. Louis, Missouri to take an airplane ride. Okay. So he was the first president to fly. After that, obviously, other presidents flew a little more and stuff like that, eventually having now the president having their own actual airplane, and I think that happened in like the 1950s or 60s. I can't remember the president. I want to say it might have been Eisenhower, or it could have been, I can't think of it who it was, but it could have been Eisenhower that had been created the president's airplane, Air Force One, and stuff like that, and that's what we have today. But Teddy Roosevelt became the first president to fly in 1910. 1911, William Randolph Hearst. He was not a pilot. He had nothing to do with aviation. He didn't make planes. He didn't do anything like that. But he offered $50,000 for a flight across the United States completed within 30 days. So whoever could do this, he was going to give that person $50,000 to make this flight across the United States in 30 days. And he was a publisher, newspaper publisher and stuff like that. So at that point in time, newspapers and the news thing, you made a lot of money in that, and that's kind of where he got his money from. Well, this intrigued a lot of people, but it did definitely intrigue Gabriel Galbraith Perry Rogers. Okay, and he said, "I want to do this. I got to figure out how I'm going to do this." So what he ended up doing is he had to get a sponsorship, just like you guys might have to get sponsorships for sports teams or things like that, where you get a company to sponsor. You may get, Patty's Place here in town to sponsor your sports team for, so much money, and they'll, get their advertisement, something on their uniform or whatever it may be. Well, he went and was looking for a sponsor, and he found a popular soft drink company to sponsor his flight. Okay. Well, it's not the soft drink company you think, okay? Because I guarantee most of you are thinking this is Coke. Nope, it was not Coca-Cola. Well, now your next thing went, it's Pepsi. Nope, it's not Pepsi-Cola. Well, then I don't know who it is. Well, that's because the company no longer exists. The company was called Vin Fizz. It was a grape pop. Okay, it was a grape soft drink, and they used a Wright Flyer, okay, in there for their airplane. And you can see they painted it up with the Vin Fizz, and it was called the Vin Fizz Flyer and stuff like that. They had posters that were put in probably local drugstores where you could buy the product, and and all grocery stores probably, and things like that. So it was a big promotional thing for Vin Fizz that they were promoting this and stuff like that. And it got people to buy their product, and it got people to be interested in how this air flight was going to take place and things like that. So Galbraith, he took off September 17th, 1911, and landed November 5th, 1911. Now, it wasn't all one flight. He had to land many times, obviously, throughout the thing, because there's no way you're going to fly for that many days, but it was 49 days. So he was 19 days over the limit that was given for the $50,000 prize. So obviously he didn't win the $50,000 prize, but he did make it from the East Coast to the West Coast on this cross country flight. Through that, he made 68 landings, not all of them very soft landings. He covered 4,251 miles at an average speed of 52 miles per hour. Okay, so that's kind of what he did, and he had a crew, kind of like how NASCAR has a crew when the car pulls into the pit, and they change the tires and they do their various adjustments and stuff like that, take off. Well, he had a crew that followed on the ground, and then he would go and land, and then he had a crew that would fix things and do stuff like that. They'd be ready to take off the next day or a day or two later, and go again. Okay, so with this crew and going across the United States and doing all this, and 68 landings and takeoffs and things like that, this airplane was repaired so many times. There were only two original parts left on the airplane from the time it left the East Coast till the time it got to the West Coast. The only two original parts was the rudder and one wing strut. And I don't know which wing strut, but one of these wing struts was original. Everything else had been repaired or replaced or fixed or something throughout the flight. Okay, so the only thing original was, again, the rudder back here and a wing strut that made the original 49-day flight. As we go on, another pioneer in aviation is Harriet Quimby. Okay, Harriet Quimby, she was a young writer, and it was around 1911, and she became America's first licensed female pilot. Okay, so she was the United States' first licensed female pilot, and she was a big advocate of aviation. And being so, she was a writer and a pilot. She used her writing to urge the country to pay more attention to commercial aviation and the development of the airplane in the United States. That was her ultimate goal. Okay, was to promote aviation, because what she saw is that there was a lack of enthusiasm for the airplane in the United States. Okay, you saw it at the beginning of this PowerPoint when we talked about the Wright brothers not having a lot of interest, no newspaper coverage and stuff like that. And some of the other things that maybe brought some interest was like like the Vin Fizz flyer and things like that. But it was all gimmickal. It wasn't sustainable as something that was going to be productive in the field of aviation. That most people thought it was just gimmick, it was just tricks, it was just fun stuff, and it wasn't something that was sustainable for most people. That what they thought. Well, April 16th, 1912, she was promoting her aviation. So one of the great ways to do it is she was the first woman to fly solo across the English Channel. Remember, I told you back in chapter 1 that the English Channel is one of those things, one of those stepping stones. If you're going to do something great, that's one of the things. You go across the English Channel just like they did with the hot air balloon. Okay, well, she was the first female to fly solo across the English Channel. Okay, so that was a great feat for her. Okay, on July 1st, 1912, she was flying the Blériot. That's how you pronounce that, Blériot monoplane. So a lot of the planes at this point in time are bi-winged or two-wing planes, and this is a monoplane. So it means it has one wing. Okay, and this is a Blériot monoplane, very similar to what she was flying, and the these Blériot monoplanes were known for having some very big balance issues. Okay, and you can really kind of see if you take a look at this airplane. We got a motor up here with a propeller right in this area. We got the landing gear over here. We got all the wing up here. We got the pilot sitting up here. I'm assuming the gas tank is somewhere in this area too. And then you start like from right back here and go back, and there's not a whole heck of a lot back here. It's frame, it's some fabric, some canvas, some stuff like that, and that's it. You can tell that this is very heavy in the front as compared to the back. There's not a balance to it. Planes nowadays are very equally balanced this way and across this way. And this plane had not a very good center of gravity. Their center of gravity is probably way up here where it should have been back here behind the pilot. Okay. Well, it's known for having balance problems. And it is unfortunate that she was doing flights. There was some type of air show that she was doing on the East Coast, and she was taking people up for flights and stuff like that. And during a flight out over the bay, she was flying, and all of a sudden her airplane lurched forward, which basically nose dropped, and the tail went up, and the nose dropped, and it basically ejected her passenger out of the passenger seat. Okay, and that passenger fell 1,000 feet to his death. Okay, the unfortunate thing is that, well, he died. A very unfortunate thing, but Harriet was able to regain control of the aircraft and pull it back out of the lurch and pull it back and begin to fly it again. But right after she was gaining control, it lurched again, and she was then thrown from her plane and died on that from that. And so that was a tragic ending to this person, because she was a very big advocate for aviation industry, and a lot of her writings would have probably persuaded more people into the use and to the development of aircraft in the United States. So at this point, this is where we're going to end the development of aircraft in the United States. The next PowerPoint is going to be how the aircraft were developed in Europe and how it progressed in Europe. And that'll be the next PowerPoint. We're going to take that up from that point.